Born into a family rich with musical talent and the dedication to share and educate others, Dr. Bruce Dalby takes us through his musical journey, from becoming an outstanding music educator, phenomenal trumpet player, and perhaps most importantly, mentoring future music teachers. Next on OTP, join Mark Goodrum for an intriguing conversation with Dr. Bruce Dalby.
And welcome, Bruce. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. A wonderful introduction there.
Well, there you go. Well, let's get right into it. Thank you so much for coming on the podium. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so tell us, where were you born, first of all, and what was your family like as you start out your journey?
I was born in Ogden, Utah, quite a few years ago, and very much into a musical family. My father was a rather well-known band director. I actually ended up being a third-generation band director because he was in his father's band, my grandfather, and we ended up in Logan, Utah. He was professor, band director, music department chair at Utah State University, and that's where I grew up. And in a large family, I have 8 siblings. 7 of us are left, and everybody played an instrument. And I started trumpet at age 7. Interestingly, my first teacher was Faye Hansen, who back in those days, of course, it was still in that era where, in sort of a sexist fashion, it was thought that women didn't play trumpet, but some did, and she was quite well known regionally and nationally, and so I think I got a good start with her and had a lot of good experiences musically growing up. Logan, Utah is where I was, and not a big town, but of course the university influence makes a small town less provincial than it might otherwise be and more sophisticated. And so there was good music happening. I played in, of course I was in school programs, but we had really quite a good music symphony in that area, in that valley. And when I was 16, I took my first airplane flight, and we went to Mexico City for a tour with that group, and some amazing experiences there.
Good experience
growing up.
Yeah, let me stop you there for a minute, because that's so enriching. First of all, I want to get into to have your dad as a director and that history. Were you feeling anything as a young boy? You seem like you were preordained to go into being a music educator. What was going through your mind at the time as you were experiencing all this? Did you just immediately say, okay, this is where I'm heading?
That's a really good question. And, in so many cases, finding a life path for a person is a real challenge. And
Sure.
And have difficulties. And for me, it was easy. Always really loved music. As with many people, young people, my identity, my self-identity, my self-concept was built around being the trumpet player. In a sense, I was a big fish in a small pond, and that's actually one of my problems in life, that I didn't have enough other young players playing at my level to kick me to practice harder. And so, if I'd had that, I think of myself as a pretty good player, but if I'd had that, I'd probably be better. But yeah, the decision was easy. I think by, 16 or so, I was focused on being a music teacher. And of course, we use the term band director, but
Right.
the term music teacher is a better term because it's more general. And so, it was an easy path for me, and I really never wavered from it. I did the undergraduate degree there in really my father's program, Utah State University, and at age 22, I was teaching high school students and growing up a lot during those years. So, so again, in answer to your question, a straightforward path, for which I'm grateful, because it's, good grief, you know what I'm talking about. You get to teach music and people, and you don't get paid a lot for it, but it's a secure middle class living, and a lot of fulfillment and joy comes from that.
Here you have that implanted in your DNA before you even knew yourself. And so now tell me, I want to be a little nosy about your relationship with your dad, first of all. Because as a band director and a father, how was that dynamic growing up? If I may be so nosy and take a peek into your personal growth, and your dad, I think you said you were into the university where he was teaching. So talk about that for me.
That's a good question. And it was, for me, it was not terribly difficult. I was in his band, say, at music clinics. We had clinics growing up there. I traveled with him to music clinics, and so I was kind of accustomed to being in his band. And he was a rather complex person, very interesting person. He had an aspect of old school band director in him. Not a lot, but a little bit of teaching, not through intimidation, but you know what I mean by old school band directors. There was a certain sternness about him at times, but he was also had a great sense of humor, and his rehearsals were enjoyable in that sense. And back in those days, you could have that attitude as a band director, and people would follow you.
Right.
Even though he could be stern, as I said. But there were, hundreds of people who would jump off a cliff for him because he was very, very well known and very successful.
Right.
Many of my friends talked about how they were afraid of him, but they loved him. And I wasn't really afraid of him, and I might have had more anxiety about when I got out into the profession. Maybe if I had any sense, I would have had more anxiety about him when he was exposed to my work, and there were times when he saw me teaching, but I didn't have enough sense to be nervous about it because our relationship was pretty good. When I had older brothers who may not have the same stories to tell about him, but by the time I came along, he had mellowed somewhat and was very supportive of me. Like I said, complex man. But yeah, my case is different. I really admire people who come to music just on their own, and then they end up getting really good at it just because they're just driven by music, and then they become good teachers because they want to be good teachers. And so in the sense, a lot of people didn't have that advantage. So for me, growing up in that tradition and following him and my grandfather into band directing was just kind of just something that happened and was going to happen, and I was comfortable with it. Good question.
Yeah. Bruce, look, if you had become, a dentist or a garbage man, I don't know what, I mean, nothing wrong with a dentist or garbage man, but,
Right.
but now, okay, I made some notes. Your dad's name again, give us your dad's name.
Max F. Dalby.
Okay.
That's a name that's coming back. A lot of old-fashioned names are just kind of out of circulation now, but that's an old name that for when I was growing up, none of my peers were named Max, but it's back. It's a cool name.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had a conversation about up in Washington with a friend of ours that's expecting and older names, Mark, Eugene, Alfred, and things like that coming back. So, so now, okay, the other thing I wanted to, you stirred in my mind. You had, correct me if I'm wrong, 8 siblings. You have 8. Now, where are you in that line?
I'm number 6.
You're not.
I have three sisters younger.
3 younger. Okay, sisters. Okay. And were they band directors? Your sisters?
An older brother,
Okay.
who's now pushing 80. He was a band director. So there were 2 of us who were 3rd generation band directors. I have a sister who's really a great musician, fine flute player, and turned into a good singer also. And she was she got her music. She finished her music ed degree in adulthood after raising 6 children, and she only taught choir for 1 year. So I'm not quite sure the reasons that she didn't continue, but that was in middle age. So
Right.
yeah, but everybody played. Everybody developed some skill. Some of us developed a lot of skill. It was just something that everybody did in our family. Overwhelmingly with satisfaction.
Absolutely. And talk about your mom.
Oh. Well, we lost our mother too soon. She was only 70. That was 30 years ago. She had arthritis, and we think, lots of treatments, which
Right.
more sophisticated today, and we think one of those treatments did in her liver. She was a spectacular lady. Had 9 children, so she was a housewife for a long time.
Yeah.
And who knows what it's like raising 9 children. Of course, when you're young, you don't know. You're selfish when you're young, and you just expect things from your mother. And fortunately, I had her long enough to express at least some appreciation later when I was mature enough for everything that she did for us.
Right.
Amazing, wonderful woman. And then she did have a work career. She was an assistant to a dean at the university, and much loved and much admired for everything she did.
Right. And her name?
Sorry?
Her name? Give us her name. Betty. Ah, there you go.
Not sure. Of course, Elizabeth is probably the female name with the most nicknames. I won't even try to list them all here, but she was not Elizabeth. She was born Betty.
There you go. All right. God bless her. Okay, so you leave high school and you get your bachelor's. Talk a little bit. Take us there.
Well, that's the standard path. You go, if you're going to be a music teacher, you go into a university Bachelor of Music Education degree. And the one where I went, Utah State University, was substantially set up by my father, and learned a lot. You know what it's like to finish music ed degrees are really demanding. I mean, there's a ton to learn about music, but you have to learn a lot about teaching.
Right.
I was fortunate in having passed a bunch of the CLEP, the CLEP tests, and so I'm not qualified in math, but I didn't have to take any math as an undergraduate. But those years were still, man. I remember. You know what it's like. You're in the middle of the semester and you think, man, how am I going to get all this done?
Right.
So you work really hard and you learn a lot. Then you go out and try to teach.
And you try to.
I was 22 and trying to be the leader, the boss of 17, 18-year-olds.
Well,
experience.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, but you were watching me about that same age when I came and met you. So
that's right.
Where was that? You were in Idaho on your first teaching job?
My first teaching job was in Caldwell, Idaho, which is a town 20 miles from Boise. It's like where I grew up in that it's a small town, but it had a really fine private college. College of Idaho there with a good music department, some really fine teachers there. And so again, it's a town a little bit more cosmopolitan than most of that size. And it had a good tradition of bands there. So going in there as a rookie, just as a kid, was daunting. But, you just have to go. You did the same thing. I didn't experience the level of culture shock that you did, coming from Boston and Grambling University to Albuquerque, wherever it is. Boy, you do a lot of growing up. I spent 5 years there. First couple of years, man, I had some good musical successes, but also some not so great experiences due to my inexperience. But by the third year, I felt like I knew how to teach, and I was loving it. I loved that job. Really enjoyed things after I started to figure out how to be more effective.
Let me put you on pause on that. I want you, because I wanted to talk later on. By the way, for the listeners and the viewers of the podcast, this may go a little long than usual. So if you want to, because I just want to take our time on this, and I hope you have time, Bruce, and don't mind. But if you want to stop the podcast and come back later, break it up in different parts. But I want to stop here for a minute, Bruce. And what is it about that you said the third year, fourth year, it seems like us human beings, especially talking about music, band, you start to get a little bit more of your sea legs, so to speak, on teaching and understanding if your mind is open. Talk a little bit about what happens to us at that point.
That's a really good question. Well, I think in many cases, the typical case, that's just a time. Gosh, those years, all those years prior to 30. And if we could keep learning after 30 at the rate we learned prior to 30,
right?
Wouldn't that be amazing? But yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly typical of young people, and I've been really fortunate to be able to work with students of different ages, including students going through the undergraduate years and then following them into their teaching careers and getting on a first name basis with them. Yeah. As long as that takes, and just observing their growth. And so, early 20s, it's not everybody's the same, but I think it's pretty typical that you do maturing.
Right. Yeah.
And that you hope that keeps going. I mean, I can look back on some dumb things I did in my 30s that I regret.
Yeah.
Haven't apologized to anybody for but maybe I'll have a chance. try to do something like lead people in a music program,
Right.
like I said, is daunting, and you make a lot of mistakes. But hey, how much of learning in life is trial and error?
All of it. And
Also, and so if you can learn from your mistakes, you grow.
Yeah. Very good point. So I believe you did 5 years in Idaho, Caldwell.
5 years.
Yeah. So where'd you go from there?
Well, I started to think about a next phase. I was a little bit slow to develop a perspective, first of all, on leadership, in the profession, but also to think about making progress, going to the next level. But I finally kind of got there. And even though my 4th and 5th year there, I really loved the teaching, I started to think about doing something next. And so I did some applications. One of the places I applied to was the University of Illinois, because that has historically been a prestigious, well-known music ed program. And the legendary really founder of that program at the time, Charles Leonard, who was a big name in music education. He gave me a fellowship.
Oh, wow.
Because part of the application process involved the Miller Analogies test, and so I guess I had a good vocabulary, and he thought I was good music ed material, so I was able to go there without paying tuition and without having to work as a TA, as a teacher. Of course, that's the downside to that, because you don't get that experience. But But anyway, I was fortunate to be able to go there, and that was very expanding experience, of course. Rubbing elbows with a lot of people from different parts of the country, the world. Brilliant professors. Great experience. Met a very, very dear friend there, Kent Erickson, who ended up following me to Albuquerque after that. And so a pivotal experience in my life was going to Illinois.
Very good point, because there are, though, as we all can look back on our lives, especially musical journey life, you can pinpoint where those forks in the roads and where you meet people. And it's like, I told my sons that it's almost like playing pool. You hit this ball and it ricochets off another ball, and you head out this direction. Could be bad at times, but so forth and so on. So you get your master's, and I believe at this point you're heading to Albuquerque. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did well there, but when I finished, I did feel myself ready for going to the next level at university teaching. And I think I was right. I wasn't ready. So I looked for another school band directing job, and sent out some resumes, and didn't get much with that, except Dale Kenter, legendary educator in Albuquerque, to his credit, as APS music supervisor at the time, took note of mine and said, "Hey, we have an opening here. Why don't you come out and interview for him?" And so for me, even though Utah shares a point with New Mexico, I had never been here, and it's a different culture. But I knew that it was west, it was mountains, it was not sticky and humid. So yeah, let's go try New Mexico. So I interviewed here and got the position as band director at Manzano High School. That was 1982. That was a long time ago, 41 years ago. And so I came to Albuquerque and taught at Manzano for 5 years. So that's 10 years total as a high school band director. Had really great experiences there. I mean, I still associate with former students, former band parents, I gig sometimes with former students.
Right.
Lee Taylor would be a good example.
Yeah.
Mike and Montemillo were they were both my students, and they're
Right. Yeah. That's
I like
great.
to say that I taught them everything they know. Yeah.
I steal that line all the time. So that is amazing. Dale Kempter, great name there. And you come to Albuquerque. I have to pause here for a minute because that's where you and I sort of connect.
That's right.
In 84, if my mind is correct. No, yeah, somewhere in there, 83, 84, yeah.
I think it was 84 that you came.
Yeah. And ironic. Yeah. Well, it has been a while. And ironically, I want to say, when I did my interview with Dale Kempter and Jim Barnell, he said at the end of the interview, we have no jobs. And like you said, the wife and I came from Louisiana. So he said, you go home and call me on Monday. And which I did. And he said, I need you to go over and see a gentleman by the name of Bruce Dalby at Manzano High School. I didn't know where that was, yada, yada, yada. And that was the beginning of our journey together. And I learned so much. Like you, and on your first position, I did not have a good feeling in confidence of what I was going to do in front of a band. And being able to watch you, even after your 5 years, it was a good time for me to observe you in front of what was called then the symphonic band. We didn't have the wind ensemble at that point. And it was great to see and watch how you, halftime shows and putting a score together and working with the kids. So I really thank you for giving me that opportunity so young in your career. And I think that probably you didn't even know you were doing that.
I was just running things as best I knew. And of course, I did have, I did have some perspective on your development and an investment in your progress.
Right.
And so I've always hoped that I did a nice job, a good job of
Absolutely.
of, helping to facilitate your journey.
Absolutely. Now, I can't remember do you remember who you replaced at Manzano? Who was before you?
Yes, a guy named Warren Alderman. He had moved to California.
That's right.
And so I've only met him once or twice, so I don't have a relationship with him. But
right.
When I came to Manzano, it was a going program. So it was my job to keep it going.
Okay, so you're at Manzano, and as you're moving forward, I remember all of a sudden you took me into your office and you told me you were leaving. What's up with that?
It's always hard. We'd had some really good success there, and so that actually earned me in my 5th year there, 1986, 87. I actually got an interview at Northern Colorado, which is a fine music school, for associate director of bands there, and I took that interview. I don't think it went real well because I still wasn't quite ready for that. But that happened on the basis of our accomplishments at Manzano that had achieved some notice. Yeah. And so I started to think about the next phase. Like, maybe it's time to do a doctorate, and maybe after that I'll be ready to go to the university level. To be honest, yes, I had part of that thought was, as much fun as marching band can be, it's grinding, man. It's all consuming. And of course, I was young. I didn't have children. I had gotten married, but I didn't have children, and so I could be laser focused on that and put all the time in this. Or I did my own drill design, but contemplating doing that in my 50s was, something that I wasn't up to, and I have great admiration for some of my colleagues. John Sanks, for example, who you have had here, and who had an amazing career, clear into those decades running high school marching bands.
Right.
But I thought it was time to move on to something else, and so I went to the University of Illinois again to do the doctorate.
Right. I have been a poor host because I don't think I clearly told our audience you're a trumpet player. I mean, it was in the promo there in the beginning introduction, but I want to make that clear. And so so you go and you're working on your doctorate. Before we leave Manzano, though, I want you to talk a little bit about the players there. I was there, and it was just such an outstanding program. Your accomplishments with the band and the students there, as well as the administration in the school. Talk about your experience a little bit there.
Oh, those were great years.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned, the program when I took it over was healthy. There were good numbers. There was a lot of esprit de corps, a lot of dedication on the part of students, a really great parent organization.
Right. Yeah.
And so, again, it's like I said, I needed to pick it up and run and do my best, if I could, to take it to a higher level. And I think we accomplished that in a lot of regards. We were well respected in all three areas of the concert band, the marching band, and the jazz band. And boy, were there some great students there. I sometimes note the fact that my second year, my senior class, was offered 13 of those students were offered presidential scholarships at UNM. Not all went to UNM to take those, but it tells you something about the graphics there at the time. And a lot of students were taking private lessons. Angela Anderson, bassoon player, ended up in the Philadelphia Orchestra for an entire career.
Right.
Amazing. I didn't teach her everything either. Really, just great experiences. If your program is successful, most people would agree the director gets some credit. But man, there were a lot of other circumstances that were favorable.
Sure, and I definitely want to just hold on to the curtails of the students and be a big cheerleader and say, yeah, we taught them all we knew, and that's how they got there, that kind of thing. That's great. Now take us a little bit into your doctorate. You talk about your dissertation. I'm fascinated about your dissertation and your harmonic intonation program. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think I was ready to do a doctorate, but still pretty inexperienced and naive about the scholastic, the academic world. So you go to a place, because I have a lot of background in music and a fairly good general education, and could write. But boy, you go do a doctorate, it's like, oh man, before I get out of this, I've got to do a dissertation.
Right.
Now that's sobering. It really is.
Yeah.
And so, And I want to be, I don't want to be ABD when I leave here. All of the dissertation, and to start, say, a new thing, the university gig, and all that's involved in learning that, and you still got to finish your dissertation, man, that's a lot of pressure. I didn't want that. So I was laser focused on getting this thing done, and I need some ideas. Well, I always had an interest in intonation. And I think I've been fairly successful in teaching it. And then the University of Illinois had this groundbreaking, really ahead of its time, networked. We're talking 1987. There's a networked computer system that's education-based, Plato. Programmed learning and training something.
Yeah.
Not organization, it was a system. And so that was tied into the music department, and one of the advisors was a pioneer, David Peters, one of the professors there, and he's a pioneer in music technology, music education technology applications. So, and I got the idea of doing something in intonation with Plato, and I did. I figured out how to program from the manual. I've never taken a class. So you have to code stuff, but it's mostly between if then and repeat until. That's 80% of coding. And so I developed that, and it worked really well. They had a synthesizer system developed for Plato. It was a perfect place to do such a thing, and put that together. Was able to implement it with some undergraduates and test its effectiveness, and wrote, and
good.
A lot of long days, but I got all that done in 2 years.
Now this is just so if my brain is working. Is this prior Windows 95? Yeah, and you doing C+ coding?
No. All I had to do was learn how to program in the Plato environment.
Gotcha.
In 1987, 89, 88, I'm programming on a network.
Wow.
I mean, this was really a groundbreaking system because, that's what, 12 years before the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate to be able to do that.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I love to tell the story of my first hard drive, which was $300+, which to a graduate student, that's a lot of money. It was 30 megabytes.
I was waiting for it.
30 megabytes for $350, but hey, I didn't have to mess with floppy drives anymore.
And you
any young people watching, which may not be any, would say, floppy drives, what's that?
And you thought you were killing it with that 30 megabytes.
Right.
Oh my goodness, that is crazy. I hope the audience is enjoying this as much as I am. That's great. Okay, so now UNM comes calling. The Albuquerque is like the mafia. We keep sucking you back to Albuquerque.
When we left with my wife at the time, and I left Albuquerque, it was like goodbye. And even though I liked the place, and that was sad. I didn't expect to be able to come back. I didn't want to end up in Kansas or some other flat place. But the university market is competitive, but I was fortunate that UNM created a new music ed position right when I graduated. I applied for it, came here and interviewed, and offered and accepted the job.
Great.
So got to come back to Albuquerque.
What were your duties there at UNM?
Well, it was a music ed position, but to fill out my load, I was offered by the chair at the time, Harold Van Winkle, wonderful man. Hey, Bruce, we need to fill out your load with an ensemble. Do you want the second concert band or the first jazz band? So I naively said, well, of course I want the first jazz band. Well, I mean, it was naive, but in terms of me needing to do the publisher parish thing in music education, creative work, output, which, you know, has to be substantial. It has to be not local, it has to be national.
Right.
So that ended up being a mixed bag because I do love teaching jazz band. But it was a challenge to get it to be a bona fide, you know, a priority ensemble here at the time. And I didn't want to do it in a half-baked fashion, so I put a lot of energy into it in my desire to up the level of the program, and that took a lot of time. And so that made getting tenure in my music education focused position a challenge, but that was accomplished after 6 years, and that's the same time that we were successful in arguing for a jazz studies position. So I chaired the committee that hired Lauren Koster, our really amazing, gifted in so many ways jazz studies director and professor.
Right.
And so that's something that I look back on very pleased that we were able to, I and some others were able to advocate for a real jazz program and a jazz position. So he took that over, and I was no longer director of jazz studies. But I've continued to teach jazz even recently as a working retiree. I've been doing some coaching of the second jazz combo. So
Sure.
That's a thread in my career that's been very fulfilling.
Amazing. So, and now I want to go into, we're going to get into the music aspect of this as far as your playing, but I think such an important part of this talk is how you have reached out to bring along future music teachers, as you want to call it, and chorus and orchestra and band teachers and music general music teachers. Talk about getting that student. And you earlier in our talk, you talked about when you were 2 years into it, and I talked about my experience getting those freshmen and trying to point them in the direction. How do you do that? How do you cultivate those kids?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a huge question, and very personal in that it's so important to do a good job of it and do the best you can. That's all you do. I mean, as I'm fond of saying, you think teaching is hard, which it is. Try teaching. Of course, neither music nor teaching cannot be taught directly, but it can be guided less or more well. Mm-hmm. And I've taken that very, very seriously, and naturally, I can only hope that I've done a better job than at least nobody trying. It's like I said, you know how fulfilling it is to follow your students at various levels, and it's really fulfilling to work with an 18-year-old through their undergrad degree. Not all of them start at 18, of course.
Sure.
But seeing their growth there, and then see them go out into the world of teaching and be successful and get more mature, and then starting to see each other as colleagues and frequently friends on a first-name basis. And so I'm glad that I can name, I won't do it now, but a lot of really good teachers who have come out of the UNM Music Ed program over the the few decades that I've been involved in it. Of course, if I get any credit for the quality of their teaching, it's far from full credit, because, you know, there are a lot of influences, including a lot of other great faculty that participate in that.
Sure.
Yeah, I've always taken it as a great responsibility.
Sure.
You know, I look back on all those years with some satisfaction,
Yeah.
and hope that I've played a positive role, at least to some extent.
You know, I as you were talking, I can't help to just parallel that of teaching how to teach in music to parenting.
Well, it's very true that music teachers are, of course, teachers in general have a huge impact, but arguably, music is so powerful in everybody's life. Who doesn't love music?
Preach it.
Nobody doesn't love music. Everybody loves music.
Right.
And so it's like I said, it's not a very great, teaching music is not a great way to get rich, but to be able to do that as a life's work, music and people, working with people, if you're well suited to it, it's fantastic. And as I love to say to prospective students, you want to be a music teacher? Okay, well, you'll be frustrated, you'll be exhausted, you'll be exasperated, you'll never be bored.
Right. That's
You're
it.
bored if you're in the wrong business. And so to be able to be in a profession where you're never bored, there's something to be said for that. And of course, you know, music teachers who are well suited to teaching love it, and I think for all the right reasons.
And this is a great lead into the content itself of music. I mean, because you are teaching a content that is so rich and beautiful and a gift. And I dare say some other teachers will get mad at me, but, you know, yes, if you're teaching math, okay, you can kind of feel that math, but I don't know. It's a little bit more difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But so, okay, you're playing trumpet. Talk about, you know, your relationship with your instrument. You started young. You talked about you've got this unbelievable background of in your DNA. It was almost like you were born with a mouthpiece in your mouth. You know, when you came out, and instead of having a baby sucker, you had a mouthpiece. I mean, your relationship with your trumpet. Tell us about that.
Well, to say that it's complex would be an understatement. I often remark about the brass thing, in that we're the only, as far as I know, well, really the only music making area in which the vibrating medium is part of the body. And man, in trumpet, that cuts both ways, because this thing, it has to be strengthened. You have to develop stamina. It's a whole world, and then it's complicated by the fact that players who reach a high level, there seems to be a rather wide range of things that work for them. So if you're struggling with some aspect of your playing, it's very hard to know what's the best way to approach it, because one person says this, another person says this opposite thing.
Yes.
And, you know, as a fairly advanced player, you know, I'm not the best player in town, but I can do some stuff. I've struggled with this more than most, because I've never had particularly good stamina, power, high notes range, and that sort of thing. And as I age, I don't know if you've noticed that I have aged since we met 4 years ago, Mr. Goodrum. It's getting rougher, so I'm actually having to pull back from things. I can still play, but the stamina and range is a real challenge. And so, is my relationship with trumpet a love-hate thing? Not hate, but it's complicated. It's I love trumpet, and I could do something where you just do this and you get characteristic tone.
Right. Well,
I've never wanted to quit, and I've always thought it very, very important as a music educator and as an educator of music educators to model that still a musician. And so that's one aspect of my career that I do feel fairly secure about, that I have done that.
Right.
I'm not one of those guys. I'm not somebody who is a music ed professor who doesn't practice what he preaches.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I do call it the love-hate relationship with my horn. I want to go to your point about, I have the argument of that reed, and sometimes the reed has a mind of its own, and there's a lot to that, but your body, your lips, your embouchure is, and a lot like the vocalist, your embouchure is the producing part of the tone. It is what makes it work. And also on top of that, you got 3 friggin' valves. And so to do what you're doing, trumpet players out there listening, it's just, along with the rest of the brass players. Don't get me started on trombone, but it's just amazing.
Well, sure, Mark. Of course, every instrument family has their favored neuroses, and you guys obsess about reeds. But hey, if you got a reed that doesn't work, you can swap it out.
Yeah.
We cannot change our reed. We're stuck with it. We're not all one personality type, but insecurity is not unknown, and it almost seems like, when I was younger, I struggled immensely with not just trumpet but nerves.
Yeah.
And as my nervous system has aged, that's eased greatly.
Right.
But that seems to be a disease of trumpet players. I can so often, I'm listening to somebody and I can hear the tremble in the tone, and I know bad things are going to happen.
Yes.
Because you get in your head and you think that everybody's thinking about you, and of course they're not. But you know how nervousness is, and I have a terrible disease of that, especially in my 20s. But again, as you get old, your brain gets older and not as brittle. So, ironically, in some ways, you're happier even though you're older and have less time left.
Well, I totally identify with the nerve. So so now you're playing. You've got the Albuquerque Jazz Orchestra going. John Sanks talked about that, and we have a clip. I want to get this clip in. I really didn't want to wait this long to get your clip in, but it's been a lot of fun talking to you.
It's been a lot of fun talking to you.
So, because we haven't chatted in a while, but we have a clip. Do you know what clip I'm going to show of you in the jazz group here?
Yeah, I gave you that just because, like I said, I've struggled a lot with being in my head, and I love to improvise in the jazz vein, and like to think that I have some chops, and typically have the experience of, well, that was okay, but I sure wish I could have played my best. And here's an example of playing of mine that I think, that's not bad. That's about how well I play. So that's why I gave it to you.
All right. Let's take a look at it.
Okay.
All right. I love it. I love it. Okay, you gotta tell us, because there are some people that are listening to this and not watching the YouTube video. So set the picture of what we just heard and what we just saw.
Well, that was
Who's playing?
10 years ago. And, man, you know what it's like when you're in a musical community. You get to know such great people and good friends and wonderful musicians you get to make music with. And so that was just a jam session organized by the pianist, Roger Baker, at his house. And I met Roger through other channels. When I met my wife, Mirle, she was his neighbor, and I didn't know him as a musician. That's got Rodney Bowe on bass.
Right.
Two wonderful people we recently lost.
Yeah.
Bob Gush just months ago.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Nick Lucchetti on drums.
Right.
Dan Golden on guitar.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you get to jam sometimes, and every once in a while you get to play solo, and improvising is something I've always advocated a lot to my students, because it's so fulfilling to be creating your own stuff in a particular style. Yeah.
Right.
So
Good
that
stuff.
Was a fun session.
Good stuff there. I just recently had a chance to play a little bit with my son on stage up in Washington.
Yeah, I saw that. Wow, how fun was that?
It was just as a father, and to be able to play with your kid. Anyway, it was beautiful, dream come true. And you're right, Bob Gush and Nick, man, those guys are playing in a better place than we are right now. So great video. Thank you so much for sharing it. Before we close off, it's a great connection into, we are all getting older. We're playing. I play with a New Horizon band, and talk to somebody out there that I've got a buddy of mine also who used to play trumpet in the Army, and he said, I don't want to pick up my horn anymore. Talk to those people that maybe in their 40s, 50s. I played in high school. I don't want to, I can't play the level I used to play. Talk to us about that, Bruce.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a music educator and as a music education professor, that's a big thing for me, because we have students in school music groups having wonderful experiences. Nobody disagrees about that. I mean, those are fantastic experiences. I wish our retention of students in music after those days was better. So that's one of the reasons that in my career, I've been trying to teach how to teach music. I've emphasized a lot of yes, reading skills are great, but let's also have skills of making music without notation. Let's be able to play by ear. Let's have music making in our families, in our communities, churches, et cetera, et cetera. So, because school groups tend to be focused on getting that one at festival, or being the trophy winner at the marching band festival. Right. But I don't think those extrinsic rewards should be our primary motivation. I think it should be a huge goal of school music programs that people want to continue making music. Right. And so after school, and so part of that needs to be, let's not be dependent on, well, that guy waving the stick. Let's do a better job of developing musical independence in our school music students. So that's been a big shtick of mine as a music ed professor. But yesterday I was on my bike going past the park, and there's a klezmer band. from one of the Jewish groups in town,
Right.
and I had to stop and talk to somebody, one of the bystanders there, about that, because those are a bunch of people who love to keep playing music, and then you also New Horizons thing. So there are opportunities to keep playing music, and you and I know what it's like, what an enhancement of life it is.
Oh man!
To be able to continue making music into.
Yeah.
We're well into adulthood, aren't we, Mark?
A little bit there, Bruce. Well, God bless you, man. And again, thank you for your journey, and just so rich and full of different. And I'm so blessed that our paths crossed in the 80s. It's been a blast, and it's not over. I'm so glad you didn't become a dentist or the garbage man. Nothing wrong with that.
Well, we've talked a lot about me, and boy, I don't know if anybody's going to make it to the end of an hour, but naturally, I'm happy to do this for you, because you've also had a great impact on people through your teaching and through your example. And I'm glad we ran into each other way back, and I was very mindful of the culture shock you were experiencing coming here. So I'm glad that we've been able to stay in touch over all these years.
Absolutely, and thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. I will keep you informed on when this drops out in public. I want to thank all the listeners that have tuned in, and Bruce is right. If you stayed to the end, we thank you so much. We hope that it was entertaining and you got something out of it. And at all costs, continue playing. So
thanks for having me, Mark.
Thank you, Bruce. And thanks for everyone listening. Let's keep on going on, and whatever you do, keep playing the right notes.
You've been listening to The Podium. If you would like to be a guest on The Podium, email the show at onthepodium2@gmail.com. That's ONTHEPODIUM TOO @gmail.com.